What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, welcome to Rated World. All right, so here we have the Two Brothers Racing MegaPhone. This is gonna be their new release. Probably by the time I release this video, this has already been released. They did have these available for FXRs, but now they got them available for the bagger. So if you guys saw the 2-in-1 shorty video that I did, it had that kick out. I really did like the look of that one, but they said they're releasing this one. And of course, I want that new. So this is a full exhaust system. Let's say you already have the TBR shorty that turns out. You probably could interchange it just using the same headers and then just switch out the actual muffler. You can switch that out and then just have the MegaPhone. But yeah, just looking at this exhaust on this type of build just doesn't look right. We got those pipes sticking out way too far, but it's always rider's preference on how you like your exhaust to look and sound. Some people like the 2-in-1 where it goes all the way back to the end of the bag. Those look good as well. I like the shorty look, so that's the style I'm going with. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and remove this exhaust and then we'll go a little bit more about this exhaust right here. Now, depending on what exhaust you have, I do have the TAP Performance 2-in-2 headers with the 50 cals and zombie baffles. So my process as far as getting it off is gonna be a little bit more extensive. I have more extra steps. Now, if you already have a 2-in-1 or if you have a 2-in-2, if you installed it, you probably already know how to get it off. Just take off whatever screws are holding it on and it'll get it off. So once I get my current exhaust off, I'll show you exactly step by step on how to get this new one on. So let's go. All right, so in the box, you get your muffler. You have your TBR logo right here. You have your front and rear header, your front and rear heat shields. You do receive 5 new clamps. You don't want to reuse stock clamps or older clamps. You want to use the clamps that they provide. You do get an O2 sensor plug kit. Now these headers do accommodate 18mm wideband O2 sensors. And with this O2 sensor plug kit, they do have the 12mm narrowband O2 sensor adapters. That way you can reuse your stock O2 sensors. In the O2 sensor plug kit, you do get a new set of copper crush washers. You have 2 45mm swivel hook springs, 1 spring puller. You have 2 5/16 clip nuts, 2 5/16 by 3/4 inch flange bolts, 2 5/16 by 1.5 inch flange bolts. You have your muffler mounting bracket, a TBR sticker kit, and your instructions. Now, when you remove your stock exhaust, you are going to reuse your flanges with the retaining rings as well as your flange nuts. Now, you can replace these flange nuts if you want to, but I'm gonna go ahead and reuse them. So first thing I'll do is remove the saddlebags. I'll take the side cover off. That way we can access our O2 sensors. Now, because I do have the DYNOJET target tune, I do not have to unplug these sensors from here. I'll unplug them closer to the exhaust, but I do suggest you unplug your sensors, route them back. Don't try to unscrew them from the exhaust while they're still mounted to the bike. You could possibly strip out your O2 sensor or damage those wires. So I would just unplug them, route them back, and just take them off with your exhaust. So to remove the rear floorboard bracket, you have this one screw right here, and it's a 5/16 hex bit. Then you can just loosen up this front one so you're able to swing it down. And for heat shields, most of us, we do have to remove them in order to access those flange nuts. They're kind of in the way, you can't fit a socket in there. So to get these heat shields off, you do have either a 5/16 nut with that clamp, or you can use a flathead screwdriver to get those clamps loosened up, get them off all the way, and then take those heat shields off. You want to loosen up this exhaust clamp, and it's a 5/8. Now, you don't have to remove the nut completely, just loosen it up so your clamp loosens up. So to remove the muffler, you have the support bracket up here. You have 2 screws and they're a 1/2 inch. You just want to support your muffler so it doesn't fall on you. Now, depending on how long your muffler's been on here, you can use some WD-40 to loosen it up. Now, for the support bracket, I do suggest just removing it. It comes out really easy. You don't want this to fly out while you're riding down the road and damage something. So I have another exhaust clamp on this side, and it's a 9/16. Same thing on this side. I have a support bracket, and it has 2 1/2 inch screws. I have a P-clamp right here with a nut on the bottom, so I do have to loosen that up in order to get everything else off. So I do have a cross under bracket right here. Now yours might be different. I have 2 screws on the top, and they're 3/16. Now for this cross under pipe, I'll loosen up this exhaust clamp, and it's a 9/16. Now, if you do have a cross under pipe with a bracket and you're removing that, I would either reinstall it or put these screws back in. That way, if you ever wanted to install something else, you have these screws available, and it keeps any dirt or grime or water from getting inside your threads, rusting that all out, making it very difficult to get screws back in. So you have 2 flange nuts in the rear and 2 flange nuts in the front. Just be careful pulling this off. You don't want to damage those studs. Like I said, I do have the DYNOJET target tune, so I can just unplug my O2 sensors right here. Now, when you remove your stock exhaust, you are going to reuse your flanges with the retaining rings. So I do have the DYNOJET target tune 18mm wideband O2 sensors. I did a whole video on this DYNOJET. You can check that out. I'll put a link in the description below. Now, anytime you add anti-seize to these O2 sensors and you go to start your bike up, you are going to get some smoke, but that'll eventually burn off. In the O2 sensor plug kit, you do get a new set of copper crush washers. Now, just make sure when you're installing your O2 sensors, you're putting the right one in the right header. Now, the torque value listed by Bosch for these 18mm wideband O2 sensors is 40 to 60 Newton meters or 29 to 44 foot-pounds. Now, if you're using your stock O2 sensors, the torque value is between 12 and 14 foot-pounds. So you are going to reuse your stock flanges. Just make sure the retaining ring side is facing towards the motor. Now, if you haven't done so already, you can go ahead and change out your exhaust gaskets. You can just take a picking tool and pick them out. Like I said, I do have the DYNOJET target tune O2 sensors, so I'll just plug them in right here. So if you're reusing your stock O2 sensors, make sure you get those routed through and connected to the right spot. Now, from here, I'll get the front and rear headers loosely installed. You don't want to tighten these down all the way. You want to make sure you get everything else lined up first. Now that I have these loosely installed, I'll go ahead and get everything else put on. Now, to install the TBR bracket that comes in the kit, you're going to remove these 2 bolts right here. And to remove these 2 bolts, I'm using a 1/4 inch X bit. So looking at this TBR bracket, you're going to install it just like this. Line it up with those 2 holes right here. I'll apply some blue Loctite. Now, for 2020s and under, you can take this transmission cover off because it is a hydraulic slave cylinder, so you don't have to worry about any oil coming out. But anything above that, 2021s and up, if you take this off, you are going to have some oil that comes out. Now, for this bracket, this bolt on the bottom, in order for it to clear, I did have to remove this transmission side cover. I just took out this 1 bolt on one side and loosened up the other side. That way this bolt had room to clear. So to tighten these down, I'm using a 1/2 inch socket. So here we have the TBR muffler. This is the MegaPhone. So if you're wondering what it looks like on the inside, there you have it. You have your built-in baffle inside of there. So here you have your 5/16 clip nuts. You want this flat side facing you when you're installing it. So this will be towards the muffler. So you'll just slide them on until they clip in. And then when you go to install it, just make sure it's lined up. That way it's a little easier to install it when you put your screws in. Now, when you go to install your 2 springs, they're gonna sit on here just like this. And then you'll use that spring puller to pull them and connect them to the headers. So now I'll get the muffler inserted into the headers. Just make sure your muffler's seated all the way. Now I'll install the springs using the spring puller. These are a little tricky to get on there, but still doable. Now, before you tighten down those flange nuts, you want to make sure you get that mounting bracket on the back of the muffler lined up and get those screws started. You'll insert them through the back. Now, to tighten down the screws on the back of the muffler, you're not going to be able to get a socket back there, so I'm using a 1/2 inch wrench. And then when you go to tighten everything down, you'll work from the front all the way to the back. And if you unplugged your O2 sensors behind the side cover, you want to make sure you plug those back in. All right, so in the kit, you do receive 5 new clamps. Now, when installing these clamps onto your heat shields, you want to orientate them where you can easily access them That way, when you're putting them on, you can tighten them down, or if you ever need to take them off, you can easily access them. So usually what I do is just line up the heat shields onto the muffler, and then I orientate these clamps where they need to go. So I'll open up these clamps a little bit so I can get them over the header. Now before I install the heat shields, I'm gonna take a rag with just some water and I'll wipe down the headers. Now black easily scratches, so I'm gonna put a rag over this. So to tighten down these clamps, you can either use a flathead screwdriver or make your life a little easier and use a 5/16 socket. Now TBR does recommend after 50 to 100 miles. That's pretty much for any exhaust. You want to recheck all those fasteners and make sure they're still tight. Now I'll reinstall the floorboard. And I'll give it one more good wipe down before I start it up. All right, so now I'll start it up. Just make sure your bike's in neutral before you start it. Now when you first start the bike, you are gonna see some smoke. This is that packaging or manufacturing oil from the inside of the pipe burning off.